Hey friends, James with Team Finish Strong, and I'm down here at the lake on this beautiful but snowy trail today. And you know, I'm coming out on such a frigid and snowy day because the topic I want to talk about today is too important to let it simmer another week, or at least until this snow thaws, which hopefully will be soon. But you know, if you remember back to last week's video, I'm going to piggyback off of that topic today because, you know, the last several months, the tension in our cities around America have been rising. You know, with these ICE enforcement actions, we have seen the rise of protests and counter-protests, and now things are starting to spill over into violence. And you know, that, friends, sadly, is an example of the domino effect. But a domino effect for evil, friends. You see, because at its root, violence begets violence. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is that the instinct to retaliate is an ancient one. You know, it's rooted in that concept of an eye for an eye. If you hurt me, I've got to hurt you back. You know, I've got to get justice for the wrong that's been done to me. And I understand that, friends. You know, it's woven into our DNA. But it is absolutely, most decidedly, the most unhelpful thing we can do to resolve the wrongs of society, friends. We cannot do things this way and expect anything except more of the same. You know, it is the legacy of history that proves that. Now, I'm not talking about legitimate justice concerns where we have to combat evil on scale. There are times when actions are necessary to suppress evil, okay? But that's not what we're talking about here, friends. What we're talking about is what's happening within our own borders. You know, it's this whole concept of illegal immigration, and I'm not trying to be partisan here, but there is legitimate concerns about maintaining law and order and enforcing the law, particularly with immigration where necessary. But you know, it has to, and I can't emphasize this enough, it has to be tempered with mercy. Mercy is at the core of who we are as Americans. And it's what our founders built the Constitution on. You know, Benjamin Franklin said that he'd rather see 100 guilty go free than for one innocent person to suffer. Well, that's mercy, friends. And that's true justice, because we believe in a higher power, a higher authority that will right everything that is wrong about this world eventually. And we shouldn't take matters into our own hands when it comes to the injustices of this world. And we should not tip the scales of injustice towards harshness or violence towards people where it's unwarranted. You know, when you do that, you evoke an instinctual reaction from people who see that that is unjust. And then that starts the dominoes tipping, friends, and not in a good way. Well, what's the alternative, you might say? Should we just let people run amok and do wrong? No, but we should always consider the human being behind what it is that we are doing and who we're acting upon. Friends, we have to do that. Jesus did that. Think about Jesus in Matthew chapter 5, when he was talking about that very topic of an eye for an eye. What did he tell us, friends, in Matthew chapter 5 about that? Well, if you're not aware, let me tell you. He said, don't resist an evil person. And we're not talking about in the traditional sense. We're not talking about putting violence back for violence. Jesus said instead that we are to love our enemies and to pray for those that persecute us. Man, how can we do that? Or maybe let's step back and do a more basic question. Why should we do that? Let's answer that first, because if you don't understand why we should do that, we're not ever going to be able to get to the how we're supposed to be able to do that. Well, why are we supposed to be able to do that? Why are we supposed to do that? The reason why, friends, we are supposed to do that is because the battle is not against flesh and blood. Flesh and blood are not our enemies. If you read Ephesians chapter 6, it doesn't talk about that at all. It talks about the principalities and powers, the spiritual wickedness in this world. That's where we wage war, friends. And if you want to wage war, look at Ephesians chapter 6 for your answer there. And if we don't even appeal to the Bible, if we just appeal to common sense, common sense tells us we cannot John Wick our way out of this, friends. You know, in that scenario, everyone ends up dead, including the hero. Is that what we really want, friends? That type of outcome? No, of course not. So that's why we cannot continue down this path of retaliation for retaliation, violence with violence. We as believers have to set the example for the world and show love to our enemies out of the power that is within us. Jesus gave us that power to love our enemies. He did it himself. We can do it too, but we have to be rooted in Christ. Like these trees here that are rooted. If they were not rooted, I could knock this tree over. But this tree is rooted and solid and grounded, and I'm not going to be able to move it. And because of that, you too can be unmovable in the face of injustice, in the face of wrong, in the face of harm that's done to you. You can repay good for evil, but you have to put it into practice, friends. You just can't read the words on the page and not let it become something that you practice in your life. You know, if you want to be able to love in the big moments when you really need it, you need to love in the little moments, the little injustices, when you're cut off in traffic, when someone has spoken to you harshly, when a friend or a loved one has cut you off for no good reason and they don't want to talk to you. Don't retaliate back in those situations. Love them like Jesus did. See them through his eyes. And friends, you will start the dominoes tipping in the right direction. Well, all right. Well, thank God I am not freezing cold out here. This was so important for me to tell you, friends, today. I pray that you will take this message to heart. If you listen to nothing else I say for the rest of time, listen to this message. It will do you well. Friends, I love you. Take care. Stay warm wherever you're at. Chances are there's probably snow on the ground where you're at too, from what I understand. So stay warm. Take care. God bless. And as always, finish strong.